Thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to talk to you about food and fear. And fear is a major component of a lot of our conversations about food. You've heard a lot about it this morning. You know, food causing cancer or stuff in our food. You know, something like a simple egg. I mean, this is delicious, right? But this egg was in a certain show called Fear Factor. Some of you recognize this as a Chinese delicacy called pidan, or the century egg. It's basically an egg that's been wrapped in lye and incubated for about 100 days. It's chemically still an egg. But why do we fear this? Why is it? Well, this sort of came to a head about 3 years ago in TEDx Asheville. This young man, then 11 years old, Burke Bear, in front of a cheering crowd, made his commitment to be an organic farmer at 11 years old. Okay, now, it's great that somebody would be committed at that age, but when he talked about genetically modified organisms and about using fish genes in tomatoes, instead of expressing this sort of kid-like wonder as how you could do this, he dismissed this as simply yuck. How have we beaten out of our children the scientific wonder about their food? We've started to fear the unknown, especially in food. Even scientists who are practicing scientists, when it comes to their food culture, they readily embrace this fear of the unknown. It's ensconced in us. These are, for example, I put up this slide of just some words that, you know, I put them up immediately. Some of you, it'll trigger some kind of fear response in most people. And I really don't have time to go through all of these words to try to explain what they are. For the most part, most of them are quite innocuous if you think about it. But I'm just going to pick one. And that would be MSG, right? Which is more commonly actually seen in this form, right? What is MSG anyway? MSG stands for monosodium glutamate. Mono just means one. Sodium is an atom of sodium. We can ignore that for this purpose. The key part is glutamate. Glutamate is an amino acid. It's a non-essential amino acid. Amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. We call it non-essential because we, humans, can make it in our own physiology. It's found in just about all proteins, and the reason why it is the key flavor of meatiness, because when proteins break down, glutamate is released. And, you know, trendy chefs nowadays get around not having to add MSG to their food by just adding glutamate-rich foods. Now, I chose this because it highlights the question, where does this fear of MSG come from? Well, it can be traced back to 1968 to something called the Chinese restaurant syndrome, where people reported, you know, headaches and nausea after eating in Chinese restaurants. Notice they never say anything about any other kind of restaurants, just Chinese. Now, in 1968, the Chinese immigration was still kind of young in the United States. Biochemically, in the lab, 30 years of research has never tied a biochemical reason to why there should be this reaction to MSG. In fact, people have been fed ridiculous amounts of MSG, and it has no effect. Biochemically, it's all in the head. That's because this is an expression primarily of culinary xenophobia. Second type of phobia involved in this is Kimaphobia, where once it's been given a chemical-sounding name, and you hear this talk about various chemicals, well, all food, we are all made of chemicals. But this nebulous concept of being called a chemical pulls forward this idea of that it's no longer natural, and that something not natural is somehow harmful. I'll take your attention to this. If you do a Google search for the word pink slime, this is a picture that usually comes up. And what it is, about 2 years ago, or was it just last year? It's just last year, there got to be this little scandal about pink slime being in our meat. What it is finely textured meat, beef or chicken, reclaimed from carcasses after the primary cuts have been removed. And it's just lean meat. This has been around since the 1980s. It's a process that's safe and can be used to be more efficient about our meat usage of our animals. And it wasn't slime at all. But the very word slime triggered this whole fiasco of disgust response among people. Factories closed. People lost their jobs. Food safety was never in question, but it's implied, and that cultural response is sufficient to cause incredible harm. Let's contrast that to this little patty here. This is, of course, the celebrated cultured meat, which was grown just this year, announced. It took about 2 or 3 years in the making. Tissue cultured beef that was grown, ironically, using fetal bovine serum, which means that we literally had to juice some cows to grow these patties. And it costs, $250,000 just to grow a patty of beef. It's highly inefficient. By the end of the day, it's literally fat-free scrap meat. I call this making a haystack out of using a 3D printer. But if you think about those two products, realize that cultured beef and pink slime is functionally the same thing. But one is celebrated and one is reviled. If you've given that much thought, there's the irony in this. We kind of live in an age of unprecedented science denial. We have these movements of organic food and biodynamic farming. These things take cherry-picked evidence. It's often propagated by force of personality. Like, I hear Michael Pollan's name being called out. I've even once had Harold McGee's book cited to me, chapter and verse, like as if it's the Bible. The key point here is that it's all about dogma over data. And why does this happen? Well, fear is profitable. A fearful population is predictable. A fearful population can be made to do things that benefits a few. So, you know what? Knowledge counteracts fear. And so I invite everyone to be more knowledgeable about their food, to take a scientific approach to it. This draws parallels to the history of medicine. Has anyone ever looked at a barber pole and wondered what the history of a barber pole is? In medieval times, barbers were also surgeons. You went there to be bled. Those red stripes that come down are the streams of blood that comes down when you're being bled by a surgeon. The end caps represent the bowls of leeches. You went to be leeched, well, when blood was leached out of you. So back then, medicine was as much about hearsay and superstition. But the advent of science-based medicine changed that. Going to a doctor became less about a gamble of survival and becoming more reliable as an institution. And it's a continuing fight. To this day, pseudoscience permeates our medical practice. But it's getting better. And so, my moonshot is to tell everyone about the crucible that is science, that you should understand that science earns its trust because it's more than just a body of knowledge of people just lecturing to you. It is a process. The scientific consensus approach is constantly being tested. And yes, with sufficient good evidence, with good critical thinking, you can change the mind of a scientist. I don't think you can say that as much of a dogmatist. So I'd like to bring the science-based approach to food. I started writing my blog. I renamed it Science-Based Cuisine sometime this year because I think we should change our food culture itself, that we should accept data over anecdotes, that we should cherish discovery over the fear. And we should promote science and innovation in our food, that there's greater range of opportunities available in our dining, in our culture, and in how we interact with each other, especially around the dinner table and around how we break bread. And speaking of breaking bread, we're getting a little close, but this is the reason why, by the way, of all the TED speakers here, of course, I did not provide my name. I'm operating under a pseudonym, and this is the reason why. I described earlier that a lot of these movements rely on a force of personality. That, Michael Pollan said so, or, somebody else said so. I don't want you to think about this because I said so. I want you to focus on the message, not the messenger. My identity is not a great secret. Do a good Google search, you'll pick me up. You'll know what my credentials are. But really, you should not trust what I'm saying because of my credentials. And with that, I would really like to invite all of you to rediscover your food again and get a little bit of excitement from it. Thank you.